Hey, Dad.
Good morning, Jamie. How are you today?
I'm good, but you can tell. So we've already been talking, and you can see I've got that vein going right there, which
Yeah, I see that.
we already know what the topic's going to be today. So we've been kind of talking about a whole bunch of things, and we were trying to figure out a good way to put a theme to it. And I think the best way I can sort of start us off is to say that we were talking about the existing structure for presidential election and where there might be frustration and pain points around that, especially in relation to the Iowa caucus having just happened yesterday. So we're kind of in that more formalized uh, space of the election. Does that sound right?
Yeah, well, I think too, um, there are so many different aspects of elections to be considered when you look at things. And you're looking at what to date, this system we have today has yielded, and the results that we have. And
And this vein.
well, I think part of the beauty of the process is there isn't a single one size fits all approach for how we select delegates to our presidential conventions. Some states have caucuses, some have primary elections. There's some kind of hybrid type of things that you have too. But
Not to mention the existing structures for incumbent.
yeah, but it's what's strange about it is 4 years after our last primaries, it looks like we're on a track that could yield the same two candidates at the end of it. And I think one of the questions that we've been kind of behind the scenes looking at between Jamie and myself is what is it that gets us to this point that gives us these two candidates, perhaps?
Yeah.
And is there anything that would be done differently that would open the door to other people for consideration, perhaps?
Yeah, and recognizing that there are people who will be happy with the existing candidates, and there will be those who are not. And so again, I think that's the piece that I am really interested in is if you are currently happy with the candidates that your party is putting forward for federal elections, I'd love to hear about that. What is it about the candidates that your party is putting forward that you're excited about? Why do you like them? How do you think that your party is getting quality candidates to that national level? And if you are maybe more like me and you feel like you are not seeing that many folks on the ballot that you're really excited about, really passionate about, what are you doing? Like, what are the steps that you're taking to make sure that you're staying involved? Are you staying involved? And are you doing anything behind the scenes to try and change the types of candidates that might be on the ballot?
Right. Well, I think too, Jamie, um, again, different states have different models for how they select delegates for president to the convention. And some require way more effort than others, like in Iowa, where people have to go out in the bitter cold and go be counted and figure out who's for who. And it's different than going to vote and take 10 minutes to vote. It's a process where you
Yeah.
make a commitment to that and select the delegates for that will eventually go on the ballot for go to the convention to be selected, selecting the president. But in each party, the uh, the the part about the frustration, I think, is that there are different issues that we each have concerns about.
Yep.
Some of it is maybe campaign finance, uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and some of it is process.
Some of
Um,
it's candidate
some
quality.
some of it is communication, you
Yep.
know, and I
Yeah,
think if you
communication
looked at
style.
yeah,
Yes.
if each of us looked at the perfect world and said, what would the primary process look,
Yeah.
like to you, and why what we have isn't working perfectly for you,
Yep.
what would you do? We would love to hear from people on that
Yeah.
front because we've struggled too, just between the two of us, trying to figure out are there different things that could be done
Yeah. What would
because
we change?
you're also working within the context of U.S. Supreme Court decisions on spending, on fundraising.
Yep.
We have a couple of historic cases that have essentially equated your spending of your money with freedom of speech,
Right.
whether that's Citizens United that opened the door for corporations and unions, or whether it was in the 1970s. I don't remember what year, but Buckley Vallejo, which said that individuals can spend their money however they want. Now, you can't give to a federal campaign anything that you want, but you can use your money to benefit, to advocate for any particular candidate you want without outside the confines of that campaign. And there's nothing to really stop you from that. It's your freedom of speech. But anyway, so there's certain things that you might want to do that you may not be able to do
Yeah.
because of our Constitution that
Yeah,
protects you.
the existing
Yeah.
structures.
Well, not structure so much, but it says that the government isn't going to tell you that you can't spend your money advocating for a candidate, whether you're a corporation or an individual or union, essentially. So, I mean, there might be certain entities that you may or may not be able to give your money to, whatever, but there's still a way for you to express yourself. You're not going to be, they're not going to stop you from doing that. But again, those are some things that might put some caps on, what you would like to. Maybe one of the things you think is, well, I'd like to see them spend no more than X amount of dollars for a particular race.
In fact, that was me. That's what I said. I would love for there to be spending caps. And I thought this was really interesting, Dad, because one of the things you were saying, again, not just about the spending caps, but about a lot of these, as we were brainstorming solutions or things we'd like to see changed, is that often these types of changes have unintended consequences, right? And especially for folks who have not worked in government, I think a lot of those unintended consequences are things that you could not foresee unless you had been involved. And even if you've been involved, you might not anticipate some of the ways things might change. Because I know we were talking about spending, we were talking about things like term limits. And so I thought that was a really interesting conversation, because I think a lot of times this happens with other issues too, where folks are trying to problem solve without all of the, with half a deck of cards.
Well, and again, I'm not saying you couldn't do something
Yeah,
that affects, spending
of
or
course.
term limits somehow, but like on the spending limits, typically, not across the board, but typically, if you have spending limits, the candidate who is better known to start with would have an advantage over the other candidate, who's the incumbent would have an
Yeah.
advantage because they might be better known, and
Yep.
the other person can only spend the same amount of money. So it would typically probably benefit the incumbent if you had campaign spending limits. But it's not to say that there couldn't be something done on that side, but it would be hard to do that probably, depending on that. Again, you look at Supreme Court decisions, an individual can still spend their money someplace else, not with the campaign, not
Right.
with the individual's campaign, but on independent expenditures or whatever they do outside of that to get somebody
Yeah,
elected.
hold on, I'm gonna pause you because I actually think this is something that not a ton of folks know about. So I'll just ask you a couple questions that I know you were explaining to me earlier. So when we were talking about giving money to a campaign, and let's say whether that's an individual, corporation, et cetera, and we know we're hopefully going to have an episode on corporations coming up, but um so let's just kind of lump everybody together for a minute. When you're saying there are limits on what you can give to an individual, but there are not, I'm sorry, there are not limits on what you can give, but it's not to the individual. Explain how that works.
Well, an individual run it. Let's just
Let's
take
say
a
I'm running for
okay,
office.
Jamie for U.S. House of
Yep.
Representatives. Okay, for Jamie for U.S. House of Representatives, there are limits on how much I can contribute to you for
Me,
you to run
my
in your
campaign.
primary election and in your general election. There are limits on what I can give you,
And they're given
and
to us by the federal government.
federal government sets those campaign limits for federal office. But that doesn't stop me from going and not spending money with your campaign,
Yep.
but going someplace else and spending money that I think would benefit your election. So if I want to write a letter to the editor, well, I can send a letter to the editor and have that posted that says I'm for Jamie for Congress. And that doesn't count towards my contribution to you. I could also, with friends, put together an organization that we want to get Jamie elected to Congress. And those limits don't apply to people who want to give me money to help get you elected.
So
I
long as
can't,
I, the candidate, am not involved, right?
you're not telling me what to do. I'm
Yeah.
deciding what to do. It's my money, and it's people who think like me who want to get something done. And that's where the courts have said, um, you there's nothing to stop me from spending my money to benefit, however, a candidate. I just can't do it through your organizational structure, through your campaign, because there are limits there, but
Right.
not
Because I liked the
outside.
example you gave of, like, if I wanted to, let's say, oh, well, we're saying that you're voting for me. So let's say you wanted to make me a big giant banner and hang it in your yard. You made it out of your own stuff from home and you made it really flashy, but then you and your neighbor wanted to do that and you wanted to hang it between your two houses. Like, nobody's stopping you from doing that. And so essentially we're saying when people gather together, they can use their money how they want, so long as you're not giving it to the individual candidate.
Yeah, the candidate isn't doing that, but we are. I mean, you can spend your money doing something like that. That's up to you. But we can spend our money however we want to. Essentially, it's our voice. It's our
So
First
then
Amendment right.
here's the second, or I don't know what question I'm on, fourth. How many candidates who are running for federal office have, without, I mean, not that they're running, but have these organizations that are working with
Well, all of them have their individual campaigns, and again, how money is raised.
individual campaigns, but how many of
Well,
them
but
have these other?
keep in mind that there's another entity, a political action committee, that can go out there and spend money on behalf of a particular interest. There might be an education political action committee that says, we want to support candidates that support our way of thinking about education, or
Yes.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
transportation.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be any way. And so people together can give their money to those organizations that can spend money toward getting people elected too. So,
But
I
hang on,
mean,
wait. I guess I want to
that could be a special interest group.
wait, but let me clarify though, because my question is: are these groups of people who are working to support a candidate but not working for them officially, are they common?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the piece that I
Well,
think.
political action committees or
Okay.
other organizations are all over the place. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they do. And again, you may even contribute to them depending on where you're working. You might have money that goes toward those kinds of efforts to try to have elect people who think in common with whatever organization you're supporting. There's all kinds of organizations put together structures that can contribute to elections one way or the other.
Yep.
Not directly, but indirectly or directly, whatever the case might be. So again, when you're looking at making changes to things, you have to really think about consequences. And one of the things Jamie and I talked about earlier today was there's an inclination to say, well, what about term limits?
Yep.
Term limits would say, oh, this individual is only going to serve for so long,
Which,
and then
and let's say
move
why
on.
people might think term limits are helpful, right?
Yeah, well, because, and again, it isn't their long-term career. It's they're serving and then they're done in that capacity. And so there's probably less likelihood that that turns into something that is just this is me, I'm here forever, and bring me your whatever, your dollars and
Yep.
whatever it might be. Now, here's the problem that you have, a couple of them. One is you as citizens, as voters, can already decide if you don't want somebody who is an incumbent,
Yes.
you can vote them out. That's your prerogative.
Yep.
Can somebody wants to run against somebody and say they've been here long enough? They can make that case,
Yep.
and you can decide if that matters to you.
Yes. So there are safeguards. There's no reason someone has to stay in office.
There's no built-in protection saying that this person's going to stay around.
But there might be some benefit to ensuring that people didn't look at their position as a lifelong place that they
Perhaps.
wanted to stay, right? It might limit
Well,
things
it
like.
might be. I'm just saying
Okay.
there
Yeah.
are people who serve careers
Yep.
in legislative bodies or in public office who do great jobs.
Of
Uh,
course.
but again, if you see a problem with that, is there something you could do about it by people who stay around too long? There are things that could be done. Term limits is one, but again, you could put an organization together if you want to and say, hey, we're going to get rid of people who've been elected to office too long. That's what we're going to do. Make a big case about it. You could do that, or you could just go out and vote for people that
Who
haven't been
haven't
there.
been there.
Right.
Yeah, I think
But
I think that's right. But we also did talk about the fact that I mean, even with the current spending that we have, incumbent candidates are more likely to win because they're of name recognition, because of the news time they get, different things that are currently part of the system.
again, we talked about this. This is one of the inclinations to say, well, let's limit campaign spending. Well, if you say that candidate X, who is an incumbent, can spend X amount of dollars, and candidate Y, who's running against them, can't spend any more than them and isn't as well known because they haven't been around for 20 years or whatever it is, well, then the incumbent would have an advantage if probably, I'm just saying probably, if you
Oh,
did that,
yeah,
not
it's
always.
true. But you know what? While you were saying that, it just made me think of something, Dad, that I was really excited about. Um, because what I what I actually said to Dad when we first started talking was, I want to talk about something that I'm not frustrated about today, which is, it turns out is really hard for me right now. So here's something that's interesting to me. What if there was some way to incentivize new candidates, people who who were not career politicians, who had never run? I'm thinking about this in the same way that we like to support in a lot of school districts new teachers, right? Like your PTO probably has some sort of special things in place for brand new teachers where they help them get their classrooms off the ground, where they recognize that there's going to be some hurdles for that group of people to get started. And so they build in structures to support them. What if we did something like that? That might be what would be good incentives to get new people into the political pool.
Well,
That's got me very
okay,
excited.
so let me just say, one of the things that you might do is term limits, which would open the door to new people.
Yes.
But again, when we talk about this, you have to understand that there are consequences for doing that. And one of the consequences for term limits is that you get rid of institutional knowledge. Somebody,
I don't like get rid of though. We have
well,
to
you
think about it
reduce
differently.
institutional knowledge because the people who were there 15 years ago can no longer be there because you just said you can't be there anymore. So what, so in some cases, and I've seen some of this where the institutional knowledge is in the hands of, for instance, lobbyists, because they've been around forever. So the lobbyists might have institutional knowledge and the legislators may not have it. And
Really
I don't know
sending
if that's,
people into a tank of sharks then.
well, in the state I live in, with the lobbyists generally would be good people to have institutional knowledge. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a consequence of getting rid of people just simply because you think that they've been there too long, whether or not it's not looking at individuals. It's just saying as a whole, it's only X number of years in this chamber. And so anybody who's been there that long expires. Well, again, your institutional knowledge then isn't, the base has moved from where it was before to a different place. And you have to just be aware of that.
Yeah.
And it used to be too that the process that people leadership took a while to work through because um, some people might be there for 20 years, 30 years, and they would stay in leadership positions.
Yes, of course. And then getting on
If
to the good committees, it
if
takes a
they're
while.
if they're moved out of there,
Yep.
then you have to have young people who can assume, or newcomers, I wouldn't say young people, newcomers to the process
Yeah.
have to be accelerated through the leadership process. And that can pose problems. It can
Yep.
be good. It's just a different consequence. It's the
Yes.
consequences are different than what we have. And so you have to understand those things, that some of that institutional knowledge, some of that leadership you lose by doing that, whether or not that's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know. I mean, you have
Right.
to, it's
But it is a consequence.
right. Which brings us to something else that the two of us talked a little bit about, and that was maybe leaving some opportunities for processes to states rather than having them covered at the federal level.
Yeah.
And what, one of the things you could do is allow the states more say in the federal election process within
Within
their
their
state.
territory. Yeah.
Yeah, so they could make decisions instead of the federal government making about all campaigns. And
Yep. Yes, as
um,
because people in a particular area might have a different sentiment about how they want an election run than other places. Now, I do think there's probably some sticky things about that, right?
yeah, well, I'm not, yeah, I think that there are.
There's some
But
reasons that we have this federally regulated
yeah,
historically, right? Like we can't be keeping people out of elections, we can't be favoring particular types of voters. Like there are historical reasons that there are federal protections in place around
you
elections.
said you're frustrated with the current process. I'm just saying.
Yeah, you're
I'm
right.
saying
And I am. I
if you
am.
want to, if you want to tinker with the process and you don't want to do it
You're right.
across the board in a way that might have consequences that you're not thinking about, one of the things you could do is give some latitude to states to make some decisions
I'm
on
saying
their
this
own.
might have consequences that you're
Well, but again, it isn't going to be national consequences. People can try different things and see what works and what doesn't work. Honestly, testing things and finding out that this doesn't work like we thought, I'd rather find that out at a smaller level than a bigger level. And maybe the consequences are better or worse. Who knows? I mean, consequences can be either way. Maybe the effects can be either way.
Okay, I think that's true. So I like all of those things about, I mean, not like, I think those are all things to be thinking about with the existing process that are places where there can be potentially tweaks or changes made. But a lot of times for me, those feel uh out of reach, I guess, right? Like it's like how would that happen? How, I mean, I know some of these things, right? Like, for example, if you wanted to run for your state legislature or something like that, or your local town government, there are some very hyper local ways that you could be working on some of these things. But when we're talking about federal changes, I think a lot of times this feels um what, too big, too far? Like, what are the ways that we as individual people can have an influence on this? And I think one of the things Dad and I were talking about earlier is how much easier it is now, for better and worse, how much easier it is to reach out to your elected officials currently, right? Like, and I was saying this past year, I would say I've probably reached out to my senators twice. I have not reached out to my congressperson, but I have reached out to my senators 2 times in the past 12 months or so via email. And you were saying, Dad, that's probably pretty typical for you too, right? A couple times a year or so, you'll reach out to your elected officials.
Yep, I do. And again, communication today is far different than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you'd literally pen a letter and put it in the mail and send it to your elected official. They would get it. They and their staff would work on a response that would take another week or two after they got it to have some kind of an answer and mail it back to you. In today's information age, it's different. I mean, you have information at your disposal. Everybody does, and there's almost instantaneous kinds of exchanges between people that never happened that way before. That information also doesn't apply just to your interactions with them. It's also the information about them.
Yeah.
It's in the news, or you can, not in maybe every news source, but there are sources for news that give you almost everything going on every day,
Yeah.
on any of those things. So it's the information flow is just a whole different approach than it was 20, 30 years ago, which is good, I think. But here's the other part of it. There's so much information,
Yeah.
it's hard to distill today. Um,
Totally.
and everybody was dealing with the same information or more so 30 years ago. I mean, there were
Mhm.
limited number of sources for information. And so um, today you have to have a discerning eye when it comes to information coming through and how you evaluate it. Because again, it's one of those things we've talked about from the beginning of our cast here, and that is your sources. Your
We spend
sources,
a
not other
lot of
people's
time talking
sources.
about sources.
We do. It's
Yeah,
critical.
it
And,
is.
and we rely on them. We aren't there in a lot of cases to see something firsthand. And because we aren't, we're going to rely on somebody else, something else to give us information about what has gone on. And we have to be able to evaluate that and know, am I getting things the way I'm supposed to understand them, or I'm getting the way somebody wants me to understand them?
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to think about another piece of the framework because when I talked about reaching out to my senators, one of the things that I think is important is that I used some other elements of the framework. Specifically, I used some bridge building. So I looked for some gateways because I think one of the pieces. So I was laughing, Dad, when you said 20 years ago. I think it's not quite 20, but almost 20 years ago that I interned on the Hill. I answered a lot of letters as an intern on the Hill. Um, and one of the pieces of information that I thought was interesting is not that offices disregard people that disagree with them, but I think that offices really care about the people that they view as supporters, and they want to keep their supporters, obviously. So one of the pieces of information that I like to use from the framework when I write to my senators is I think about ways that if I disagree with a decision they've made, I try to first build a connection and explain something that I either like that they've done or something that I support that they've done, so that they're not just writing my information off as like a naysayer. And I'll give a specific example. Wait, this is something I'm grumpy about again. There's a person in the Senate that I don't think should be there anymore. And I am frustrated that the senators have not ousted this man from the Senate. And so I wrote to both of my senators and I said, here's the deal. I do not care what party he is in. I want you to do the right thing and get this man out of the Senate. But I wrote it in such a way that said, I believe in a lot of these things that you've done, X, Y, and Z. And this to me feels incongruent with those. I need you to do the right thing here, just like I've seen you do it in these ways. So they knew that I was paying attention. And not that everybody needs to do that. Like you can say whatever you want to your senators. I don't think they get a lot of real nice mail. So I try to write things nicely. But I think that that was important, right? To show that you're informed, to show that's what's going on and that you care. Like I care. I'm watching what they're doing right now. Um, so
I think that's a really good way to do it. I think that makes a lot of sense. Uh, I probably don't spend enough time conditioning anything that I say. So,
you're
but
one
I
of the
would,
negative mailers.
no, not negative. But I think that's really a good way to do it, to make that connection with them. And as you probably know from having worked in a office on the Hill, a lot of times the mail that they get isn't from individuals as much as from organizations that get individuals to write in on a postcard or
And
whatever.
people
So
don't care about that, right? Like I don't care if we
you'll
got
get 1,000
thousands.
postcards
Yes.
on one issue that
Yeah.
were put out by and the information, the person sending it may or may not know all the facts behind that. When you get
Yeah.
something from an individual like you're saying, I
Where
do
they
think it's more, I think it's more
Right.
impactful. I think it's
Yeah.
more impactful. I think that's a good approach. But I think that the idea of having that contact is awesome. I think that we have a government where we still feel compelled to interact with those elected people, for whatever reasons, several times a year, whatever it might be.
Yep.
I think it's a really good thing. I think it's a good sign of our government that we still feel that way,
Yeah.
uh, that we can do that, and I think that's a good thing. I do think there's just so much information overload today that it's hard to distill for us, for the people, as well as for office holders, to figure out where people really are on things, because there's just so much information going everywhere all the time. And you have to have a distilling process for all of that. But anyway, I think to make a difference, what do we do that's different than we have today? For me, I'd say try to find some ways that you can experiment instead of having um, wide, broad range of effects across the board on everybody, and find out that the consequences aren't what we thought.
Yeah.
Give
So
more
isolated
latitude, yeah,
exploration.
give more latitude to states, to do some things to find out if things might work differently. And we do have some of that in the presidential election process, where we have caucuses someplace, we have primary elections some places. There's different ways of doing it, and I do think that's good. It doesn't mean the results are what we want, necessarily. That's fine. I mean, and that's the way it is every election cycle. Your candidates may do as well as, better than, or worse than you had hoped. Whatever.
Yeah.
I think what you'd look at is, are there other ways to structure these that would provide the incentives to open doors, to give you better information to make decisions on. And I think
I like
that's the
that.
key. I think that's kind of the key to it. And so how do we get there? I would, if you're looking at a solution, I don't have a solution. I think that
I
there's
like that you got your whole argument written out because I'm just like, wait, don't let me forget to say that thing.
no, I just think we're better off trying different things, different places. And the the real answer is there may not be one answer for all of it,
Yeah.
because we have different ways of looking at all of these things across the country. I don't think what works in one state necessarily will work best in another state, and we shouldn't expect it to.
Yep.
That's why we have states. If it was, we wouldn't need state boundaries if we were all going to do everything the same.
Yeah, but Dad, and I think I don't disagree with what you're saying, right? Like I think it'd be really interesting to see what would come out of more individualized state level elections. What the piece about that that feels a little out of reach to me is that it's really hard for me to picture what I would do today to change how my state does elections. What I do feel like are some things that I could do today. And honest, this is kind of where I am right now. I'm like, I need to do something about this today. I feel this frustration, right? I got the vein going. Um, and so I'll speak directly to the politicians out there because you know how many of them are listening to us right now. Um, I think there are a couple things that I would like to see. And this is why I think reaching out to your candidates, finding places where this is happening, where you feel like you can plug in, are really important. Um, Here are some things I would like. I would really like more authentic communication from candidates. I think we talked about this a little bit, right? Like candidates still treat the news like these archaic systems. Like we're still dealing with debate programs that are 90 minutes. We're still dealing with a back and forth interview with a newscaster. I don't care about that. I don't care about the newscaster's questions. I don't think they're very good. I'm much more interested in seeing an on the ground candidate talking to me. Tell me how you feel, right? There are so many platforms for that. And I know that that's scary for a candidate, right? It's really scary to be an authentic person because you are going to get ripped apart by so many people. But there are so many other people, myself included, out there who are looking for real humans. You know when somebody is out there and they're buttoned up and they're telling you exactly the news line and how they can stand right between the red and the blue so that everything sounds really nice and pretty. Everybody knows that and it's fake. And I want to know what you're actually thinking. Like, was it hard for you to come up with the answer? Do you care about it? Like, is this something you're passionate about, or are you just trying to put something out there right now because you know it matters for people to vote? That's all of those are fine. I just want more authenticity from the candidates. And there are platforms for that. But I think there is such a hesitancy for people to really dig in because of the way our news media system works. So I guess what I'd love to see is more authentic candidates, more opportunities for realistic interaction with candidates, whether that's through email or through social media. I'd love to see something good come out of social media, right? Like, let's have it be that. And there are some people who I think are doing a really good job with this. I'm going to throw his name out there because I really like what he does. It's Jeff Jackson from North Carolina. I don't live in North Carolina anymore. I used to a long time ago. I didn't vote for Jeff Jackson because he didn't run while I lived there. But I think he does a great job on social media. I don't agree with all of his political ideology. That doesn't matter to me. I really like to listen to him explain the behind the scenes stuff of his work. He's just authentic. And again, it can be polished. I get it. He's probably got somebody behind the scenes making him look real good. But that is something that I think we can ask for, right? You can reach out to your candidates. You can write letters, you can email, I think a lot of them have texting now. Like that feels like something you can do today, right? And I can't change who the two-party candidates are going to be. I mean, I can get out there, and if you are currently registered, you can vote in a primary, but like I can't change that. But there's a lot you can do at a more local level.
Yeah, I think personal interactions are almost impossible, especially in some states. You'd never be able to, an individual would never have a chance to meet with citizens very close up in person. But there are exchanges that can take place on other formats and other formats in on other platforms that would allow for that kind of a different kind of relationship than than what you see today largely. And I do think some of the smaller states do give you more options. I do think, for instance, in this isn't that part of it, but Iowa caucuses, those are fairly intimate.
Mm-hmm.
Candidates get to know people individually,
Yep.
and I think there's that might not work some places, but it works fairly well in the
Again,
confines of
speaking to
Iowa.
localized differences, right?
Right,
Like
right,
that
right.
kind
Yep.
of intimate system maybe wouldn't work in a place like California where your population is massive, but in a
Right.
place like Iowa where you're more contained, it
Where the
actually does.
candidates, if the public's interested, they can go see candidates any place, almost any time. And and that happens there. So I mean, again, I think some experimentation and not to think that there's a one size fits all answer to it.
Yeah.
Look at different ways of doing it. I think what can you do today? I think
Yeah.
use what people didn't have at their disposal 20 years ago to influence processes. This is the information age. There's an information explosion. Find ways for yourself to use platforms to convey your thoughts on these things,
Mm.
and not to office holders per se, but to others who might be like-minded, to say this is something we need to, consider working on, finding ways
Oh, I
that
like
we
that.
can open these doors for us, and put together other like-minded people that um, are inclined the same way. I don't know. I think it's just I think that there's things today that you can do that nobody ever thought of doing decades ago.
I really like that, Dad. And since you did your what to do today, I'll do my big one that I don't know how we would answer, which is that I think we should look at ways, and maybe this is part of what people could do state by state, to incentivize and support people new to government to run and to be elected into positions that they have never been in before. How do we broaden the pool of folks who feel supported to run in those positions?
Yeah. Oh, and I think if you're talking about if you're talking about not the government, but how do we as people do those kinds of things, it's a good idea. I don't like the government deciding that we need to have something one way or another. I'd rather have people make
We
the
know that
decision.
about you.
Well, I mean, I don't have any problems with lots of incumbents. I do think I can see some of the challenges that incumbency creates, the problems that it can create.
Yeah,
And I do see that. Um, but I think we should look at all kinds of tools to how we address that. And again, when it comes to an incumbent, they have to run for reelection. If you don't like that, make that one of your points for why you think something should be done about them. They've been around long enough. Let's give somebody new a chance. I mean, there's nothing preventing you, stopping you from doing that today, or organizing an effort to advance that kind of thinking. So, I mean, I think there's things that can be done that
yeah.
don't require changing a process as much as creating an awareness of other people using the tools at your disposal.
I like it. Okay, so I don't think we have any real answers, but we did have some things that both we can do. I
We
actually feel
want to
much
hear, and I
better.
think we want to hear from others'
Yes, I
thoughts.
think that's exactly it. Please let us know. So I'll do my end of the thing plug. Thank you for listening to us here. You can reach out to us at ourhouseundivided@gmail.com or through our Instagram account. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do you like the current system? And if so, what things do you like about it? Are there pieces you dislike? And what would you like to change? And what are your ideas for how we do it? What are the steps we take today? And what are the long-term goals?
That's right. And lots of things to think about, and we're going to have a lot more to talk about in the coming weeks. And we look forward to other people's insights on this as well. So thank you, Jamie. Thanks. Love
Yeah.
you.
Love you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.